Branding doesn't stop at a great logo. So in this new series, we're taking you along to create a full visual identity based on an original mark. In each episode, we're going to spin the wheel to find out what designs we're going to be creating, and we'll take you along the journey to design everything from custom packaging to merchandise and even a food truck. Let's get started. Today we're tackling a Parisian-inspired book and plant shop called Mon Lieu, which means my ivy in French. Right away looking at the logo, I'm getting that Parisian feeling and also kind of a vintagey vibe. I think you can create something really beautiful where we kind of have a Wes Anderson aesthetic meets kind of these more pastel, lime-washed wall aesthetics. But before we do anything, let's find out what deliverables we'll be designing. Okay, so we are taking on brand pattern, custom illustration, and a website landing page. Before we actually start designing anything, I always want to build out this idea and the vision of the brand so that we can really see it in front of us. This is true for any branding project because if we jump straight into trying to, let's say, design the landing page, it's going to take us so much more time to try to think about how illustrations are incorporated, how the fonts and the layouts are working. So we want to really start to get that image across first. And I like to work in Adobe Illustrator for this. I really like these kind of pistachio tones that we have in the logo already, but I think we need to bring a little bit more warmth as well. So traditionally for these kind of more Parisian pastel-y vintage feelings, you often have like a blush pink color. But I'm thinking that maybe we can go a little bit different and do more of kind of a peach tone. One trend that I've really noticed in the last few years, and that I've actually even brought up with some of my clients, is this tone-on-tone color palette strategy. So it really allows us to add a lot more color without it feeling super overwhelming. So I think it can be a really great strategy where you can still have a lot of contrast and a lot of variety and options for your colors, but you're not overwhelming by picking like 5 different brand colors. I think having these kind of powdery, pastel-y background colors with a much more contrasty, punchy version of the same colors, it really helps us build a lot of visibility and contrast and accessibility, but also it's kind of giving a hint at those almost like peeling lime wash colors that you have on walls in those Parisian buildings that we can see. Next up, I want to find some photography that can help us do a little world building. This is of course images that we can use in our branding later on, but it's also images that help me as the designer try to get a clearer image and a vision for this brand. I'm just using free sites like Pexels or Unsplash for now, but if you do have a budget, there is a site I really recommend, which is called Stocksy. This is not an all-paid sponsorship, but I really like them because they have a lot more variety and they also have a lot more inclusive photography. You do have to pay for the licenses for each photo, but you can also download a comp if you want to just show your client, for example. And if they like it, you can ask them to pay for that license. Or you can include it in the fee if you have budgeted for that starting out. I found these images that I really love because they feel a little bit more muted, but we still have this really lush kind of cascading floral effect, which works really well with the idea of ivy because ivy is also like a wall covering climbing plant. I also want to find some really close-up images because as we're building out things like the landing page, we want to make sure that we're getting that kind of some details, some further away, and building that world of feeling like you're almost there at that location. So here's my final little collection of the images, and I really like that they have this kind of almost faded effect, but I did have an idea to make them even a little bit more special. Personally, I really have a soft spot for these hand-painted murals, especially in these old European traditional buildings. And what we often see there is it becomes a little bit faded over time, so they can start to kind of blend together more with the background wall color paint. So I thought what could be cool is if we make these images black and white, and then we just add a color layer on top and choose multiply for that color effect, and we use a lighter shade that we use for one of our powder, let's say pistachios or powder peach colors. Then we can layer this and get that real tone-on-tone effect, which also feels kind of vintagey and like it's worn down and lived in. Ooh, okay, I think this could be really nice and this is giving me so many ideas. So let's start working on different layout and little custom illustrations. Because we want to keep this style of the more minimal but still kind of whimsical, I'm thinking that the illustrations should be just a single dark color tone and we'll add some details in there. I'm thinking maybe we can do some badges and some illustrations that we can layer together so it becomes a little bit more like almost stamps that you're finding along the way. So let's jump into Procreate and do some sketching. Whenever you're creating custom illustrations, I highly recommend using reference images. Of course, we don't want to copy anything, but let's say now that I'm drawing plants, if I am just kind of drawing them from my imagination, I'm sure they look cute, but they're not really gonna feel as real as what we could do if we use a reference image. So it's not about copying something or copying someone else's illustration, it's just about trying to get more dynamic, different angles, trying to get it to feel a little bit more interesting in your illustration. So I like to just collect lots and lots of images so I have lots of things to pull from, and then I add my own style into it. This first stage of the sketching is all about being super open and just trying lots of ideas, not feeling too stuck like you need to really refine one idea first, but test lots of ones and see what you like, because you can always go back and erase things. Since we're sticking to this more pared back color palette and style as well, I do want to add a bit more texture in my illustrations, especially since we're going for that kind of worn down, rustic feeling. One way to do this is with the brush that you're picking. So because I'm working in Procreate, I like to use the dry brush setting that comes with Procreate already. So this one's completely free. But occasionally I also use a brush set from a creator called Mimimoo. I'll make sure to link that down in the description. Another way to add texture could be to add little stippling or little details to create that texture more manually. I think this will give a lot more personality to the illustrations, and it also kind of gives that more worn in, welcoming feeling. Once I have lots of sketches that I'm liking, I start putting them each on one of their own layers so that I can actually illustrate them separately. So I do this because at first I want to see them all together to make sure that the style is working and feels really cohesive, but then I want to be able to export them each as one artboard. To make sure we're really getting that cohesion, I've actually set a specific brush size that I'm going to be using across all of them. So if you do work in Procreate, you can just go to your little widths panel here on the brush, and then you can actually set one as a specific setting. So this is perfect. Let's say you're coming back to create more spot illustrations for the same brand a few months later. You don't have to try to use the slider to match the actual width of the brush that you had, but you can actually just go in and grab that setting. This will be unique to every brush, so if you're using different brushes, you'll need to do it for each one. Once the illustrations are ready, I export them as PNGs, and I make sure to turn off the background layer first so that we're getting a transparent PNG file. This is going to make it easy to actually layer them and use them in lots of different ways in Illustrator. So let's drop them in with the other design elements and have a bit of a play around. I love this big bold script that we have for the name, but I think that maybe having something a little bit more delicate could be a nice addition to create a bit more dynamicism in the brand. And I found one called Ballprick's Script that I think could be a really good fit. It's not as easy to read as some of the other fonts that we're using for this project, but I think I can use it more as a design element. So this is for information that's not very important to convey, but that can create a nice aesthetic. Since we're designing a brand pattern, I think a great way to actually do that is to think about how we could use wrapping paper or tissue paper for this company, because they're going to be selling flowers and books. When you're buying something, you can get that custom tissue paper with this brand pattern on it. There's actually a super easy way to create brand patterns in Adobe Illustrator. All you have to do is select all the different items that you want to include in your pattern, and then you click Object, Pattern, Make. Once we do that, we get this panel open where we can actually customize the pattern. So for example, how the repeat is done. And we can also start to move our little illustrations and other design elements around because we have this live view, so we can actually see how this affects the pattern. A really big tip here is to use a mix of smaller and bigger elements when you're designing a brand pattern, because you're going to be able to fill those little awkward spaces with those smaller illustration items. And that way you're getting a really nice seamless pattern where you don't really see the repeat very obviously. Once you feel finished, then just click Done, and this is going to add your brand pattern as a swatch in your swatch panel on the right hand side. Then when we want to use our brand pattern, all we have to do is choose a shape like the rectangle tool, for example, make sure we've selected our brand swatch, and then just create that shape and cover the whole artboard. For example, let's say we're creating a tissue paper. Let's pop it on a mockup so we can see the seamless repeat and how it will actually look in the shop. Okay, I'm loving where we got so far, so let's take everything we created and actually build out that landing page. I like to work in Adobe XD, so let's start by just setting up all of our brand colors and fonts so that we don't have to actually go and add that in for each block we're adding. Then let's change the background color and start adding in some information. I always prefer wireframing first by just blocking out where each piece of information goes, and then I can go in and drop in my actual footage and my actual illustrations and start customizing and tweaking things. But having that structure is not only going to help with the logic of it, but it also helps you not get stuck in designing mode. But you're just thinking about the structure first and then the more detailed parts. For each section, I'm also working in parallel on the mobile version of the site. We want to make sure that anyone who's coming, let's say through marketing, and who are already on their phone are going to get a great experience from the site as well. For a physical shop like this, who aren't really going to be selling online, I think the most important information to convey is going to be things like their opening times, the location, like where to find them, but also just to convey the types of items rather than showing like every single thing that they sell. So we really want to get across this feeling and the brand and who this is for. So really people who are seeing this, who are saying, oh, that's exactly my aesthetic, that sounds super cozy, they're going to get that right away. A few little last details, and this is how the landing page came out. I had so much fun creating this brand, and I would love to hear from you what kind of business we should do this process of going from a logo to a brand for next. Make sure to leave it down in the comments, and if you watched all the way here, I actually want to give you a little special gift. We just launched a portfolio glow up course where we take you through 30 days of updating your portfolio with super strategic choices and also things like how to create your own mock-ups and create great case studies. As a thank you for watching all the way through, I'm going to give you a 20% discount with the code SECRET20. I'll link the course down below so you can go and check it out. Thank you so much for watching. Good luck with your projects, and I'll see you next time.